Alrighty, we're going to continue today our method of going through Proverbs, asking questions, searching for answers, listening for answers, and asking more questions till we're satisfied, till we feel like we've had a nice back and forth, a conversation with the text. So let's get going. We left off last time on that first question of why this order. But now we're going to look at the relationship between the verb and its objects. That was our second question. So let's look at these. To know wisdom and instruction. To understand words of insight. To receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity. To give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Okay. So let's start in verse 2. To know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight. So knowing wisdom and instruction. Well, let's just start there. Well, we talked about last time, to know is sort of this external thing, right? It's that surface level of you either know or you don't. And when I think of instruction in particular, right, instruction is usually an external source, right? You don't tend to talk of instructing yourself, right? You have to have an instructor, you have to have a teacher. And so instruction is something you get from someone else. And wisdom is something that it seems like we don't just naturally have, right? This is something based on the Proverbs, the way he's setting up this process, it's something that you get, it's something that you develop, it's something that changes you, it's something that you receive. And so knowledge for wisdom and instruction, it's like it's this other thing, right? That's external to you. And you have to know what it is before you can go anywhere else in the process. So it's that external thing. And it probably involves someone else helping you get it. Then we go to understanding words of insight. So understanding words of insight. So, right, the question we're going to keep asking is, okay, why understanding words of insight instead of something else? Right? Why is he pairing this thing together? So, understanding words of insight. So, words are kind of interesting, aren't they? They're the way we communicate with one another. They're how we transmit ideas, right? Words are symbols that represent concepts, that represent objects in the real world, right? So that we can talk about them, so that we can communicate them. And so if knowledge, right, is sort of this external thing that we either have or we don't, words of insight are like the transference process, right? Especially when you're thinking about this as someone who's doing this for you on your behalf, right? Of starting this process for you. So you have an instructor and they have the idea in their head, but you don't have it in yours, which means they have to give you words of insight. And then you know those words, but it doesn't help you if you don't then understand the meaning of those words. So this is pretty interesting. Right? If we have an instructor, okay? And for now, let's say the student, right? Well, the instructor has knowledge, and we can call this, right, wisdom and instruction. He has knowledge that you don't have, okay? Your little thought bubble, our little thought bubble is empty. Oh no, I don't have those things. But then he takes that wisdom and instruction, he or she, your instructor, takes that wisdom and transmits it, right, via words. And now, right, words are something you can understand. You can't necessarily just grasp the ethereal world of ideas, but words are something you can understand. And so it comes from ideas and knowledge and instruction to words, and words of insight, right? It's not just any kind of word. It's words of insight into these things. He's not just relaying information. The instructor is giving you sort of targeted understanding, right? So he's not just dumping all of his knowledge on you. He's giving you words of insight. He's starting to open your eyes to these things so that you can understand the bigger and bigger picture. So insight seems very surgical to me. Right? This isn't a knowledge dump. This is someone who's giving you what you need so that you can get more of what you need that you may not even know you need. And then to receive instruction in wise dealing. So this is still instruction. That's kind of an interesting link. In wise dealing, righteousness, justice, and equity. Okay? So, again, our question, why this receive and with all of these other things? And this one is a little tricky, right? Because we have to receive instruction, and then what kind of instruction? Instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity. Okay, so we're receiving instruction, but now this is a particular kind of instruction, right? The instruction is developing, right? We had this first stage of knowledge becoming words and being able to be transferred to us, right? So now we're kind of getting these ideas and we're trying to understand them. But then we go to the process of receiving, right? So we go from the hands-on wrestling, keeping it out here, to getting it inside us, okay? And you could even say, right, that the words fill up the thought bubble, okay? So knowledge is being transferred into there. But to receive it, understanding is getting it into your head, but then receiving it is getting it into your heart, right? Changes in character. And so that's why this is a new kind of instruction. At first, it was to know wisdom and instruction. It was just to have something you didn't have, to be made aware of something you don't have. Then he started to gently open your eyes, right? That surgical insight. But now we're starting to get the full development of those ideas, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity. And when we look at these four things, what do they have in common, right? Why are these things here instead of other things? I mean, there's lots of things a wise man could teach us. So why these things? Instruction in wise dealing. Now, when I see the word dealing, right, because obviously we want to be wise in everything, but when I see the word dealing, I think, okay, this is relational. This is dealing with other people. But then I look at the word righteousness and I think, well, is that person is that per okay, I don't know why it's doing this. Sorry, technical difficulties. Uh, is that personal? Huh. Okay. Just a second. And all right. Okay, we should be good now. In wise dealing relational, righteousness is righteousness personal? Because justice seems relational too. And equity definitely seems relational. Right? So righteousness seems kind of personal, but justice, justice is, well, there's lots of philosophical argument on that, but it basically boils down to treating people the way they should be treated, and dealing with people in the way in which they deserve to be dealt with. And that varies greatly depending on how you view and understand people, right? That's why God can be just and deal with us as mercifully and gently as he does. And that's because he has a bigger picture than us, on what we deserve and how we should relate to him. But anyway, justice is definitely relational. Equity seems relational because equity seems like you're saying, okay, equity would be, I'm not going to differentiate between a rich person and a poor person, right? I'm not going to differentiate between a foreigner and a countryman. And so recognizing the humanity of all people, and then justice is more of how you treat all people. And righteousness, well, that sounds like it's just moral character, and maybe that's true, but it seems like maybe that righteousness is also relational. And I say that because I'd ask the question, righteous is compared to what? Right? How do you know you're righteous? And you could say the same thing about justice and equitability. That might be a word. I don't know. But righteousness is judged based on what standard? Well, that standard is God, right? And so we're righteous according to how we conform to God and his character. And so I think there is a sense in which righteousness is kind of relational, and righteousness would seem to be the basis of being just and equitable, which are definitely relational. So even if righteousness is just personal, which I'm not convinced it is, it's still the foundation for the relational characteristics and the relational instruction that we're getting. And so this is pretty cool, right? Because in this process of receiving, we're being changed in our hearts, right? We're being changed internally, but we're being changed for the sake of others, right? Because the things we're receiving instruction in, the things that are changing us, are relational. And so we could think of this as a heart being transformed from self-centered to others-centered. And that's what's happening in the role of wisdom, right? Because what's the next step? It's to give prudence to the simple. And just like we talked about, it's not 100% clear, right, who's doing the giving. And you're thinking, well, wisdom is giving the prudence to the simple. But what if, like we talked about last week, it's actually the pouring out of the wise person's life, right? This person who's received instruction, who's being changed in their character, who's receiving these wise words and becoming wise in their dealing in righteousness and equity, now is the person overflowing to the simple, giving prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. And so this is the giving portion. We're giving prudence, and we're giving knowledge and discretion. Okay? And who are we giving it to? The simple and the youth. And I did this a little wonky, but the prudence goes with the simple and the knowledge discretion with the youth. Okay. So our next question is, why these things? Right? Why do the simple need prudence? And why knowledge and discretion to the youth? Should have done that in green to be consistent. Okay, there we go. So why these things? Well, we're returning full circle, right? I think that's another hint that this is actually part of a process that becomes a cycle, right? Because the first section is to know, right? It's about knowledge, something that someone doesn't have and then they have, so that they can wrestle with it, so that they can receive it. And the simple and youth both seem like groups of people who don't have the knowledge they need. I think you could even, it's possible that these kind of go together, but I think it's really more of well, let's think about it. Why this word simple? What does it mean to be simple? We'll come down here. What does this mean? Well, so if simple is differentiated from youth, we can't just lump them together, though it would seem like youth are always going to be simple. And so simple has to cover youth and other people. Otherwise, you're just saying youth and youth again. So simple, it seems like, would just be people without this knowledge of wisdom. They're people without the access that they need, right? They don't have that external person, idea, teaching that's coming into their lives and giving them even the opportunity to wrestle with it. They're just simple. And that's lots of us, right? That's not talking about stupid people. It's not talking about even people who don't have full control of their mental faculties. It's talking about people who don't have access to this knowledge. And that could be for any number of reasons, some of which may be their fault, some of which may not be their fault. But youth, so simple, right, is this very broad category of people without knowledge, and there's lots of reasons they don't have it. But then youth, right, I think this is a by nature sort of deal, right? Youth don't have much knowledge. They just don't. And they don't have discretion. And why don't they have that? Well, it's because they haven't worked their way through the world, right? They haven't had a lot of experiences. They haven't had a lot of opportunity to be taught what discretion is, and experience the consequences of not having discretion and whatnot. And so the person who has been given these things has a heart for the people who don't have these things, right? They have a heart for the simple. They have a heart for the youth. And actually, right, this other focused heart over here that we looked at, others is the simple and the youth. It's a special place in there for people who don't have what they have. And gosh, doesn't all this sound like the gospel? I mean, this is really amazing. Okay, so walk through this with me for a second. I know we haven't talked completely about prudence, but I really want to get this idea out. Think about this with me. Knowledge, wisdom, and instruction, right? That thing we don't have, that's apart from us, that's other than us, right? Comes to us via a person, an instructor, with words. What does that sound like? Are you telling me that doesn't sound like John 1? I bet some of you saw it before I did. Because God has all the wisdom and instruction. Of course God has all that. He doesn't need to be instructed by anyone. He doesn't need to be told how to be wise by anyone. He has all that. So wisdom, instruction, logos, right? Logos, reason, understanding, comes down. The word, that which humans can understand, comes down as an instructor in order to teach us not just in the head, right? Because he gives us these words and we seek to understand them in our heads, right? And they make their way in there. But he's far more concerned with changing our hearts. He wants our hearts to be changed so that we can treat people differently, so that we can see them as he sees them, right? Words of insight, so that we can have different kinds of relationships based on righteousness, justice, and equity, so that we pour ourselves out, those words that he's given us, that life change, to those who were like us before, who didn't have it, to other hearts that are empty, hearts that need hope, that need wisdom, right? I mean, wow. I mean, this is the power of the gospel. Which is pretty incredible, right? Because it makes you think of that verse, right? That I'm not going to quote it quite right, but right, it's essentially that the wisdom of God seems like foolishness to man. I think the one I'm thinking of is the foolishness of God, like, is greater than the wisdom of man, right? Those things that seem foolish to man of God, that God does, are actually, far wiser than what man does. And when Solomon, the wisest man in the world, writes down his introduction and outlines this process of what it looks like for the Proverbs to make you wise, right? For what it looks like to become a wise person, he outlines the gospel. He doesn't have that full picture, right, of God becoming man, of wisdom taking on flesh and becoming the Word. He doesn't have that vision of a completely changed heart that's being conformed to the image of the Son. But gosh, he realizes, he knows that wisdom is beyond him, and it's something he receives. It's something that he works to understand, and it's something that changes him for the sake of others, right? Why is he writing this book? Right? It's all baked into the cake. The process of becoming wise, when you become wise, makes you an others-centered person. And that's what these proverbs are all about. It's about becoming the kind of person who's changed by the wisdom that they're receiving and makes others wise, right? And then imagine a world full of wise people. How wonderful would it be, right? What would it look like for everyone to treat each other with justice, equity, and based on righteousness? I mean, right? That's heaven, basically. And that's all baked into the cake of his introduction. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. And, right, just as a reminder, it's focused, right? Your heart becomes focused on those who don't have what you have. And those people are always the simple. They're the youth. They're the weak. They're the set to the side. The ignored. The wise man has a heart for those who are at the bottom and who don't need to be. Goodness. That is really beautiful. Well, let's walk back through this. We're kind of at our time. So let's make sure we've followed this all the way to the end. We're answering this question. What is the relationship between the verb and the, oh man, isn't that funny that we started with that word relationship and then it ended up being all about relationship? I mean, that's amazing. But we recognized, right, that knowledge requires an external, someone else, and that's key, right? Because then we realized that an instructor is involved, and that instructor gives us words that we can understand and take into our mind, that we can receive then into our heart, and then our heart becomes a giving thing. It becomes others-centered. And this whole image, this whole process just mirrors the gospel. Because this is what God did for us, right? God gave us his word so that our hearts could be changed and we could change the hearts of others, people who are weak and ignored. Beautiful. Beautiful. I mean, this should make you really excited to continue reading the Proverbs, right? That becoming wise is going to align yourself with the whole mission of God in the world. Beautiful. I'm sorry, I can't. It's pretty amazing. So I hope you'll continue to join me on the rest of this journey as we pick up in the next video, moving on from verses 1 through 4 to 5 through 7. Hope to see you there.